Well, good morning. My name is Mark, and typically on Sunday mornings I'm down at the Yoder campus, but it's really cool to be a part of a church that has so much diversity, for lack of a better term, that I get to come and hang out with you guys. And I would actually encourage all of you to experience the broader Journey Church, whether that's attending a campus that you don't normally attend. Give it a try. Head up to McPherson or down to Yoder, or a service you don't attend. Maybe going to a first or second service, or even the youth service. I would recommend checking with Casey or Jesse before going to youth service, because there could potentially be like a snowball fight that you don't know about. But experience our church, because it is cool. God is working in lots of different ways throughout the Journey system. This week we are continuing our series on rest, and so I ask for a show of hands. How many of us feel well rested right now? 1, 2, 3, 4. Sweet, that's pretty good. There's 4 of us that feel well rested. So I think it's pretty indicative that we need to look at what does it mean to rest? What does it mean to Sabbath? This series that we're working through is largely based on a book by A.J. Swoboda, and he did studies through like Jewish culture and through the Bible, what the Bible has to say about Sabbath and rest. There's a picture of the book up here. It's a bit of a slow read, but it has a lot of great background. So if you want to learn more on your own, I'd recommend taking a look at that book. Sabbath, as far as the Merriam-Webster dictionary is concerned, is a day or time of rest and worship. A day or time of rest and worship. Today is a day of rest. So I would actually say, like, if you need rest right now, take it. If you fall asleep, I'm not going to make fun of you or call you out. I know that sounds kind of like a joke, but this is like we're here to rest and to worship. So if that's what you need, go for it. We as humans are pretty horrible at resting, at keeping Sabbath. Jeremy, you can sleep. It's cool, man. We are pretty bad at resting. We're pretty bad at taking rest. We either fall into 2 kind of, I don't know what you call it, bad rest habits. One would be that we say like, well, I'll rest when. I'll rest when I have time, or I'll rest when I retire, or I'll rest when I get caught up on everything I need to do. And it never happens. That's the first thing. The second thing that we kind of get caught up in is creating rules around rest. Well, like, you can do this, and that means you're resting, but you can't do that because you obviously, if you do that, are not resting. And so we go through life just trying to follow this strict set of rules, and that's not what Sabbath rest is about. Sabbath rest is about giving life to us, not restraining life from us. Sabbath must be intentional. It must be intentional to be experienced. There's a Jewish scholar that says this about holy rest. Holy days, rituals, liturgies, all are like musical notations, which in themselves cannot convey the nuances and textures of live performance. What I think the scholar is saying is that Sabbath, rest, is a lot like sheet music. How many of you have played an instrument at some point in your life? Okay, a lot of us. Okay, so you kind of understand the idea of reading music. You can read this piece of music, and there's lots of dots and dashes and swoops and doops and Fs and Ps, and it tells us what the music should sound like, right? But if you read that sheet music, you can't really experience the music until someone plays it. And when someone plays music, music can bring joy, music can bring tears, music brings emotion. And I think that's what this writer is saying, is that like Sabbath rest cannot be experienced unless you experience it. And so we can learn about rest, which is what we're doing right now, but we can't fully understand rest unless we take the time to do it. We're not supposed to just know about the Sabbath, we are to know the Sabbath. During these 4 weeks, we're going through kind of 4 different topics of rest. Last week, Howard talked about rest for me, so a personal rest, what it means to be rested spiritually, emotionally, physically, and socially. And then this week, we're talking about rest for us. What does rest mean for community? What does rest mean for our families, for people around us? In a couple weeks, Jim from the McPherson campus will be teaching about rest for creation. What does it mean to let creation rest, or to rest with creation? And then Jesse, who's your discipleship and youth pastor, will be talking about rest as worship, using rest to honor God. This week we're focusing on rest for us, for community. How does rest affect community? We as humans are intended to be in community. Even God himself is in community. When God created people, he said, "Let us make man in our image." Like God, Son, Holy Spirit, they are in community as one, just like we are to be in community. And when God created us, he created everything and said everything is good. Yeah, everything God created is good. Did you know that there is one thing that is not good in creation? And God actually says it. He says, "It is not good for man to be alone." Loneliness is not good. Community is how we as humans are designed. God's intent is for us to be in healthy community. And rest is a part of that. In Leviticus chapter 23, Moses, who's leading the people of God, he's talking to God and he's listening from God and telling the people what God is saying. And God is giving Moses a list of parties that they're supposed to be having, these festivals that they're supposed to be celebrating. And the first one in Leviticus chapter 23 is the party of Sabbath, the festival of Sabbath. That people of God, that we are to celebrate this day that is set aside. The words in Leviticus 23 are sacred assembly. Now, sacred means set apart or holy, and assembly is a gathering. So we have this holy gathering every 7 days to come together, to rest, to remember who God is, to worship. And it's amazing. One of the coolest things is that has been happening every 7 days for thousands of years. What we're doing right now is a part of God's story forever. That's cool. So right now it's 11:30. What would you be doing any other day of the week at 11:30 a.m.? What would you be doing? Working, making lunch. What do you do for work? What do you do? Nurse, so you'd be helping people? Anybody else work? Computer, you'd be sitting at a computer working. Okay, so is there anybody who at 11:30 on a random Tuesday would be with 100 other people worshiping and learning together? Anybody? Exactly. Like this time right now, we as a community have set apart as something different. And like I said, it's been happening every 7 days for all of creation. It's cool. What we're doing now is awesome, to be together, to worship God and rest. Author Christopher Ringwald shared a study about Jewish culture. And one of the things he found is that on the day of Sabbath, which for Jewish community is actually Saturday, not Sunday, but on Jewish Sabbath, the death rate plummeted. That like more people die every other day of the week except for Sabbath. And I think that gives us an idea of like taking rest, taking Sabbath and worshiping God brings life, not just emotionally, but like physically. Like we experience life when we experience Sabbath. One thing I like about hanging out with all of you is that we are different. The only thing that really brings us together is our commitment to Jesus. That we are different ages, we have different jobs, we have different political views, we have different careers. We're just completely different people. But we come together, we set aside time once a week to hang out with each other and worship God. Rest brings life to our community. This sacred assembly is part of what Sabbath means for our community, but Sabbath is bigger than that for our community. It forces us to take a break from the hustle and bustle, and it forces me to be invested in the people around me. Whenever I am personally cared for and rested, it actually allows me to fully invest in other people other times. We've all heard the term burnout, where like you just do and you 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 just can't go anymore. Well, God knows that we as humans need a break. We can't do all the time. And so he gave us this gift of rest so that we can do 6 days a week and then we can back off and rest so that next week we can continue working productively. In Mark chapter 12, verse 31, Jesus says that we are to love our neighbors as ourselves. I think we overlook that sometimes. That if we aren't caring for ourselves, how can we care for our neighbors? I don't want to talk too much about it. Howard talked quite a bit about it last week, loving ourselves, taking Sabbath for ourselves. And if you missed it, you can go on the church website and listen to Howard's teaching from last week. So how do we intentionally take Sabbath and rest together? Well, rest involves setting boundaries. When we set up boundaries, it might seem like a stifling activity to set boundaries, but it actually is a freeing activity. It allows us to fully experience life within those boundaries. I want to read a little bit from Exodus chapter 23. Exodus 23, verses 10 through 12. It says, "For 6 years you are to sow your fields and harvest your crops, but during the 7th year let the land lie unplowed and unused. Then the poor among you may get food from it, and the wild animals may eat what is left over. Do the same with your vineyard and your olive grove. 6 days you are to work, but on the 7th day do not work, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, so that the slave born in your household and the foreigner living among you may be refreshed." What I think we can learn from this little short passage is that our work brings benefit. When we work, good things happen. And when we stop working, those good things don't stop happening. They actually are able to happen for other people. When we rest, this verse says that the people that serve us get to rest. That we serve people, they serve us, and when we rest, we can all as a community rest. It tells us that when we rest, the earth actually rests. And I don't want to get too much into that because Jim is talking about that in the coming weeks. But that creation is able to rest as well. Our machines can rest. In this verse, it talks about donkeys and horses. But today, like, have you ever used a computer and like it's been on for too many days in a row and it's just like it just gets slower and slower and slower? What does it need? It needs a rest. It needs a restart. When we rest, our machines are able to rest. When I set the boundary that I won't do work on one day of the week, it actually allows me to be more productive the other 6 days. Boundaries aren't meant to be stifling, but life-giving. The Society for American Landscape Architects did a study. And what they did was they took a playground set and they put it out in the middle of a field and they put a bunch of kids around it and they watched what happened. And what happened was those kids played on the playground. Imagine that. But what they noticed was the kids just kind of stayed on the play equipment or near the play equipment. So what they did the next time they did this study was they put a fence all the way around that field. And they put kids out there, and the kids played on the playground equipment. But what they also did was they explored the rest of the field. They went and they found bugs, and they played with sticks, and they picked flowers, and they went out to the edges of the field in addition to playing on the play equipment. The boundaries actually gave them freedom, because without the boundaries, there's this unknown of everything out there. And so if we don't put boundaries on what we can and can't allow ourselves to do, there's this immenseness of unknown that I just can't function correctly. That boundaries are required for us to experience rest. For some conservative Jewish synagogues or Jewish churches, they actually have what they call Ervu lines. And this line is a kind of an imaginary boundary around their community that the church leaders set up. And they basically say, if you want to be a part of that church, that synagogue, you must live inside that boundary. And it sounds like, whoa, don't tell me where I have to live. But realistically, what it does is it's a small enough boundary that on a Sabbath, you can walk to all of the other members' homes. And it allows you to be in community with each other without working, because part of the Jewish tradition would say that you can't travel certain distances on the Sabbath. And I live in a real small town. I live in Yoder. And I've kind of wondered, what would it be like if one day a week, everyone in the town of Yoder stopped using our cars? What would that be like? And I just kind of imagine, there would be people on the street, we'd be walking, we'd be interacting. It would make our community different in Yoder, where I live. So one of the things about these boundaries, this idea of boundaries, is what happens when my boundaries clash with other people? What if I work somewhere that is open on my Sabbath day? What happens if I work with people who don't observe a day of rest, and so when I'm resting, they're texting me or calling me or emailing me, and they want a response? What do we do with that? What happens if I want this job promotion or I'm trying to make this land deal or this agreement with somebody and I got to do it now or I might miss out? Like, what do we do with that if that's part of our boundaries? Now, I don't have answers for these. I'm not going to go into that because I don't know. But what I want us to understand is that the boundaries give us freedom. The boundaries allow us to live with freedom. And our boundaries will actually intersect with other people's boundaries. I have a friend. His name is Eric. You might know him. He's a pastor, and his Sabbath, because he works on Sundays, his Sabbath day is Thursday. And there are days, and my Sabbath day is not Thursday, typically. And so there are Thursdays when I want to get some work done, and so I will want to talk to Eric. And he doesn't want to talk to me, which might feel bad, but realistically, if I don't respect his boundary of Thursday as his day off, he won't be able to care for you all the way he does. And so I would actually encourage you as a group, respect Eric's Thursday. And the other pastors in our church, I think even in the bulletin it says what days of the week each pastor does Sabbath. Try and respect that because it allows them to care for our community better. There are also some social clashes in these boundaries. So like, it's really in the bulletin, I promise. You can, or it might not be actually, I don't know. All the high schoolers are like flipping through and saying like, what? Anyway, now I'm lost. Okay, so there are some social clashes to this idea of boundaries because there are things that are okay to say no for. Let me give you some examples. If somebody invites you to go to something or to meet with them or whatever, you can say like, well, no, my kids have this thing. And that's cool. Everybody's like, oh, your kid has a thing. Cool. Or if you're like, no, I have to work. And everybody's like, oh, you have to work. Okay, that's cool. Or like, I have a doctor's appointment. Or I have an appointment with somebody else. Everybody's like, okay, that's cool. Try this next time. When somebody says that they want you to come meet them or do something, say like, I have an appointment to rest. That's weird. Or what if you said like, actually, I have a meeting with Jesus. I'm not going to be there. Like, it's super socially weird, but I think that shows, like, we're not really good at that. We're not good at just saying no. My wife, Kendra, actually encourages me, like, don't make it awkward, Mark. Just say no. Like, you don't have to give a reason. You can just say, like, sorry, I can't be there. And that's okay, because boundaries allow us to live inside the freedom of those boundaries. In Luke chapter 14, Jesus tells a parable, and a parable is a story to illustrate something about the kingdom. And in this parable, there's a party, and the guy that's throwing the party is inviting people. And he invites one guy, and that guy says, he's like, well, I can't come to the party. I just bought a piece of property. I need to make sure everything's okay. And so he invites somebody else, and that guy says, well, I just bought a new vehicle. I need to make sure it's working right. I won't be at the party. And then there's another guy, he gets invited, and he says, well, I just have a new family. I just can't be at the party. And Jesus basically, through this parable, is saying, like, hey, hanging out with me is going to mean your life is different than other people. That those boundaries will mean that we give up some things. When we set boundaries, not everyone will understand. So I asked this question, like, what boundaries should I set? And some people ask the question, like, well, what can I do on the Sabbath and then still rest? Like, I think that might be the wrong question, because I think we should not do on the Sabbath. I think we should be on the Sabbath. And so what does it mean to be on the Sabbath? For the rest of this morning, I want to talk about the 3 B's of doing, that doesn't sound right, the 3 B's of Sabbath. How do we be Sabbath? Which, that doesn't make sense in my head, but it is what it is. It's in the notes here, so must be right. Anyway, so how do we be on the Sabbath? The first one, and I think the most important one, this is like absolute most important, is to be prepared. Be prepared to rest. We'll talk about what that means. The second one is to be slow on the Sabbath. That when we are to rest and to worship, that we need to be slow. And the third one is to be present, to be fully present on the Sabbath. So being prepared for a day of rest, for a day of Sabbath, of worship, of connecting with other people, is not a day to catch up. Like, it's not a day to catch up on things that you wish you would have done yesterday. I personally have never entered an intentional rest period with everything done. There's always work to do. There's always the lawn to take care of, the laundry. There's things I need to do, phone calls I need to make, whatever it is. Your life is the same. There's no time in your life where everything will be caught up. And the Sabbath is not a catch-up day. It's not a day to get things done. that you wish you would have done yesterday. Some people would argue that taking a day off, taking a rest day or Sabbath, is an economic decision. And I would agree, in some ways it is, but in other ways it's actually freedom from the worries of the economy, because if you look at the Jewish tradition again, there's what's called the preparation day. So Jews celebrate Sabbath on Saturday, so Friday is a day of preparation. And so one of the things, if you're in a Jewish area, one of the things you'll notice is that on Fridays, everything kind of is like this buzz. Like there's things happening, there's people shopping, they're going to do stuff, they're getting ready, they're preparing to rest. The shopkeeper or the store owner or the business owner doesn't have to worry about shutting down on Sabbath, because the day before was actually a boom in the economy because everybody was preparing to rest. God knows that preparation for rest is important. In Exodus chapter 16, we see the story of God's people going through the desert, and they need food, and God provides this food. What was it called? Does anybody remember? Manna. Yeah, so this food is called manna. God provided it every day. It came down. They went out, picked it up. They took it in. They ate it. They weren't supposed to keep extra, because what would happen to the extra if they kept it? It would get gross. Yeah, it would rot. There were maggots. It would stink. But one day a week, something weird happened. They were actually supposed to take 2 servings, and they were supposed to save it overnight. And the weird thing was, it didn't rot. What that shows us is that God understands that preparing to rest is a need. That God has designed us to prepare for rest. Like Howard mentioned last week, Exodus chapter 20 is the first time where this word Sabbath actually shows up in the Bible. And it says that we are to remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. And what does it mean to keep the Sabbath holy? Keeping it holy. Well, the Hebrew word for keep that is used here is a term called la kadesh. And it means to keep, but in a broader term, it means to prepare. This word la kadesh is used to describe how a bride prepares for a wedding, which if you've ever prepared for a wedding, is it can be a big deal. And so, whenever we think about keeping the Sabbath, we are to prepare for, we are to put work into, we are to get ready for the Sabbath, or a day of rest. Preparing for the Sabbath involves intentionality. You have to ask questions. Like some of the questions, as I've been preparing for teaching this over the last 2 weeks, my wife and I have been intentional on Saturdays about asking these questions. Is what will we eat tomorrow? That's a question we asked yesterday. What will we eat tomorrow? And so it might involve going grocery shopping. It might involve cooking. It might involve making sure our grill is clean so we can turn it on and not have a fire. There's things that need to be done so that we're ready to eat. So some things we ask on our day of preparation is, how will we travel? If you're planning on going on a bike ride, maybe pump up your bike tires on Saturday so that you don't have to worry about it. Make sure there's gas in the car. Some other questions what will we wear? Doing laundry on our preparation day, or maybe showering Saturday night so that that's not a hassle you have to deal with on our day of rest. Now, I know that in my household, for Kendra, my wife, to rest, there are no toys on the floor. That's just if Kendra rests, there's no toys on the floor. So on Saturday night, we run around the house, put everything away. So we actually take about an hour to 2 hours to get ready, I say this like we've always done it. For the last 2 weeks, we've taken an hour to 2 hours to get ready. And I struggle with this. I was talking to somebody out here just a few minutes ago before the service started. I feel not the right person to teach this lesson because I'm really bad at it. We've only done this for 2 weeks. I intend to continue, but I think it shows man, I've got a ways to go. To be able to fully rest, I'm realizing that I have to take a few hours to prepare ahead of time. Now, some people would say, well, you could actually just leave your house, let all the mess and all the junk home and go rest somewhere else, and you don't have to worry about preparing. But I would say, well, what does that do for the people who are preparing for me? What about the people who are making my food or preparing the activity that I'm going to? Is my rest infringing on other people's ability to rest? In Hebrews chapter 4, it says that we are to make every effort to enter that rest. And it's talking about this Sabbath, holy, sacred rest. So rest requires effort. One of the goofy things that I thought about, I was like, okay, we have a cat, which her name's Blue, but she's black. But anyway, it's our cat Blue. And I was like, okay, if I give her 2 scoops of food on Saturday, she'll survive till Monday. And I was like, that's one task that I just don't worry about because we are preparing for our Sabbath. It might mean simple things like splitting firewood so that it's ready to go when you want to hang out. When I'm not prepared, it takes away from the intended rest. I have to catch up on my day of rest, and the Sabbath is not a catch-up day. It's not a day to get things done. So we're to be prepared. The second B is to be slow. What does it mean to be slow? One of the things that I think that means to be slow is to only do things that are life-giving. For most of us, we need to slow down to experience life's rest. We are overscheduled, busy, full, and fast-paced. And focusing on being slow is a step we can take in the right direction. We are busy. This is a picture of my calendar from the past week, or my family's calendar for the past week. And I don't show this for any other reason than to say, like, we're busy. Most of us have a calendar that looks similar to this. But one thing that I want you to see is this item right here is another thing I've done intentionally over the last couple weeks is to schedule my Sabbath time. And so that item, it says Mark Sabbath. And because I knew I was teaching at the Yoder campus last weekend, teaching here this weekend, I was like, I'm losing a half a day of Sabbath. I need it. And so I scheduled it. And I've never done that before. And I would say, like, intentionally doing that was awesome. My son and I went camping that day. We spent some time in nature. It was really cool. It allowed me to slow down. And like we talked about, in the Jewish tradition, Sabbath involves walking, slowing down, making people more available to each other. Now, defining what is life-giving and what is not life-giving is difficult. In Mark chapter 2, we see a story of Jesus and his disciples. And let's see here. And in this story of Jesus and his disciples, it says this. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields. And as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" He answered them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the day of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for the priests to eat. And he gave some to his companions. Then Jesus said to them, 'The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath.'" So this day of rest is designed for us. We are not designed to honor the Sabbath. The Sabbath is designed to honor us. So defining what is life-giving is really, really difficult. In this passage, Jesus' disciples were being accused of harvesting. So in their culture, like if you harvest grain, that would be considered work. And so the Pharisees were saying, like, "Hey, Jesus, your friends are working, and that's not okay." And what I think Jesus kind of chuckled and said, like, "Hey, guys, like, they're having a snack. Like, is snacking okay on the Sabbath?" And what I think Jesus was getting at is, like, this idea of, like, what's life-giving and what's work is a tough distinction to make. And today, it's really tough. Like, what is life-giving and what is not? Am I harvesting or am I eating a snack? Like, it's just tough. I would encourage you, if you're trying to figure out, like, what boundaries should I set? Like, what is life-giving to me? To figure it out in community. So if you're a part of a missional community, that would be a good place to ask the people around you that know you really well, is to say, like, what gives me life? What should I be doing on the Sabbath? And what is draining for me? What takes away life from me? So how do I be slow when it's time to rest? What gives me life? Is being with people give me life? Well, for some of us, yes. Some of us, no. Is being alone life-giving to us? For some of us, again, yes, and some, no. Is working up a sweat, going on a run or a bike ride or lifting weights giving us life? I mean, some yes, some no. Some of us, it's life-giving to just sit by the lake and enjoy the sunshine. And some of us, that's draining. So what is it that gives us rest? There's no clear-cut answer. It's something that we need to discern together for each other. One encouragement I would encourage you to do is to only schedule one thing on your day of rest. Now that could be like a family meal, it could be going for a run, it could be whatever it is. I would encourage you to schedule only one thing. And the reason is because if you schedule one thing and nothing else, you don't have to worry about what's next. You don't have to say like, okay, what time is it? Oh, okay, we got 2 hours, we got to get to the next thing. It's like, no, you can just be. You can just be present in the one thing that is giving you and your family and your community life. And that takes us to the last B, is to be present. To be present. Sabbath involves giving up what I want in exchange for something bigger than myself. And this is a hard lesson to learn because in most of our lives, we get to do what we want. If I'm watching a movie and I don't like it, I just shut it off and I go through the thousands of other movies that are available online and I watch the movie that I want. If I don't like the food, I send it back to the kitchen to be made again. If I don't like my car, I get rid of it and buy a different one. Like everything we do, pretty much, we get to choose what we like and what we don't like. Sabbath draws us together, not because we like similar things, except for Jesus. Sabbath draws us together because we are committed to God, to be present with God and with each other. It involves giving up some things that we may want, not looking to what's next, but to what is. And this isn't new. Like the book of Amos, Amos talks about this is what the people are saying. They're saying, when will the new moon be over so that we may sell grain and the Sabbath be ended that we may market wheat? They're basically saying like, okay, it's Sabbath, but like, when does it actually end? Is it like Sunday at noon, or is it like at 2 p.m. or is it like Sunday night or Monday? Like, when can I be done resting? And I think what we can see here is that this desire to be productive isn't new. It happened back then, it happens today, but again, we're not understanding. If this is our attitude of like, how far can I push it? When can I start working again? It is not getting at the root of what Sabbath means. Sabbath means being present. And rest is also corporate. And corporate in like our group, like we've been talking quite a bit about this morning, but it's globally corporate. In Psalm chapter 46, this is a pretty common verse, and we probably already have all heard it before, is be still and know that I am God. And it's like a really like reassuring verse, like be still and know that I am God. What God is saying here is just be. Just rest and know that I am who I am. And whenever we read this, sometimes it's like, oh, cool. Like, I like this feeling. Like, I want to be still so that I can be rested. But if we read the next phrase, it says that this is God speaking, I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. And what I think it's getting at is that if I cannot be still and let God continue working, I am actually stifling God's exaltation around the world. That if I can't live in a way of this rhythm of Sabbath and work, that I am stifling how awesome God is to other people. That rest is communal. So for today, if I had one thing, if you don't remember anything else, I would say that being prepared is what I would recommend. Like being prepared, getting yourself ready to rest. So for the next 6 days, I would encourage you to be prepared for the day of rest, which for most of us is Sunday. And the way I want you to remember this is that Sunday is not a catch-up day, okay? So Sunday is not a catch-up day, and you need to remember that. The catch-up is for Monday through Saturday, no catch-up on Sundays, okay? So what's going to happen here in a few minutes is the offering plates are going to come around, and there's going to be a basket of ketchup packets. What I want you to do is I want you to take a packet of ketchup to remind you to use your ketchup before Sunday, to catch up on what you need to do so that next week you are prepared to rest. Let's pray. God, thank you for who you are. Thank you for the gift of rest. God, this week, over the next 6 days, may we be really productive. May we prepare well to experience the rest that you have for us. Amen.